In today's video, we will look at a class of artifacts available within the Annotator for Clinical Data Configuration Editor known as qualifiers. The purpose of qualifiers is to give additional meaning to the attributes that are identified within our text. The definition of a qualifier includes a qualifier name and the value to generate based on the match of a concept or text that appears before and/or after an attribute. In the demo, we will see how to identify qualifiers related to the clinical attributes that we have defined for our solution domain. Switching now to the demo. Here I have a cartridge called Cardiology Demo. The cartridge contains two artifacts, the UMLS latest dictionary and an attribute set called Cardiology Attributes. Let's go ahead and preview the cartridge. Here we have text that includes some details about a patient with a heart condition and the patient's medication. If I go ahead and click Run, notice that we have an attribute that has identified that the patient has a cardiac arrhythmia. However, in the text, there is additional information about the arrhythmia, that it is both uncontrolled and symptomatic. This might be interesting pieces of information to carry along with our cardiac arrhythmia attribute. This is where we can use qualifiers to obtain this information. So let's go now and create a qualifier set. Switching to the Cartridge tab, I'll click Create New Artifact and New Qualifier Set. I'll give the new set a name. And I'll go ahead and click Create. Now let's create qualifiers to capture the additional details we wanted about our cardiac arrhythmia attribute. We'll open up our new qualifier set. And the first qualifier we want to capture was that the arrhythmia was symptomatic. So we'll create a symptomatic qualifier. And in this case, we want to match on the concept identifier for symptomatic. We can select whether the qualifier is allowed to be either before or after the attribute or both. In this case, we'll select both. We can also select the value to use when this qualifier is fired. In this case, we'll use a value of true, which is the default. We can also add an additional value to fire if the patient is discovered to be asymptomatic. So we'll go ahead and match on the concept identifier for asymptomatic. And in this case, we want to give it a value of false for our symptomatic qualifier. And we'll go ahead and click Create. Now let's repeat the process to create a qualifier for controlled versus uncontrolled. So we'll name the qualifier controlled. And like we did with symptomatic, we'll match on the concept identifier for controlled. In this case, it's controlling. And we'll use that default value of true. And we'll match on the uncontrolled concept identifier. Again, if it falls in neither the before or after position of the attribute, in this case we'll give it a value of false for our controlled qualifier, and we'll click Create. Now if we go back to preview and run with our new qualifiers, you will notice in the right-hand sidebar that an additional eye icon appears next to our cardiac arrhythmia attribute. If we click on that icon, we can see that two qualifiers have been discovered, a symptomatic qualifier with the default value of true, and a controlled qualifier with a value of false. If we hover over the attribute in the main preview window, we can see that the qualifier name and the values appear within the attribute details. Now let's look at one more example. In the second sentence, there is information about the medications for the patient. In this example, we would also like to capture that the patient had hypersensitivity to Coumadin. We can do this by adding an additional qualifier to our set. So let's open our qualifier set, click the plus icon, and create a new qualifier called reaction. In this case, we want to match on the concept identifier for hypersensitivity. And this time, we'll select before as the position for this concept to appear, and we'll give it a value of hypersensitivity. We'll go ahead and click Create, and then returning to Preview and Run. Notice now in our medication attribute with the value of Coumadin, the eye icon appears. If we click that, we can see that a reaction qualifier was detected with the value of hypersensitivity. So in summary, qualifiers are a useful way of identifying additional context surrounding your clinical attributes. This concludes the video.